Updating Statutes for the Advanced Legal Research course at Boston College Law School. When your research involves a statute, one of the first things you need to do is think about the timeline of your issue and whether it involves past or future behavior. When you're advising a client about current or future behavior, you will want the most recent version of the statute. But if you are researching law for an event that happened in the past, you need to be sure you're looking at the version of the statute that was in effect at the relevant time. And when you are advising a client on issues involving future compliance, it may be necessary for you to keep an eye on pending legislation. Because laws change, you need to be sure you are looking at the law as it actually is now or at the time of relevant actions. Whether you're using a print code or an online version, there is generally a lag between the law's enactment and publication as the session law and the incorporation of those changes in the statutory code. So the first step in verifying that you are looking at a current law is to check the currency statement of the code you are using. Deluxe services like Lexis and Westlaw show their currency statements on every page of the code. Here we can see at the top of this and every statute on Lexis the statement of how up-to-date this code is. This is not the date of this particular section. It is a statement of the last session law incorporated into the code. That is why this is stated as current through Public Law 116-158, approved August 14, 2020. It is not 42 U.S.C. Section 5553 that was approved on August 14, 2020. It is Public Law 116-158, which has nothing to do with solar energy that was approved on that date. Westlaw makes you work a little harder to find out how current the code you are working with is. At the top of each statute is a link to the bottom of the document. Here we see that the U.S. Code on Westlaw, on the day I made these slides, was also current through Public Law 116-158. To find the currency of the U.S. Code on Bloomberg Law, you need to first click on the General Info link. This code is also current through Public Law 116-158, which was signed into law on August 14, 2020. Again, the currency of the code is measured in terms of the latest session law that has been incorporated into the topical arrangement of statutes. Here is the currency statement for the U.S. Code from the Office of the Law Revision Council, the people who actually compile and maintain the code. This version of the code, the day I made this, was current through Public Law 116-158, which was signed into law on August 14, 2020. This page also states that each section has a currency date at the top and will alert the user to any pending updates. Today, all four codes happen to be current to the same public law, probably because Congress has been in recess. But since each of the codes updates on a different schedule at any time, one may be more up to date than the others. The U.S. Code at the Office of the Law Revision Council site also includes a statement on the same page as each code section of how up-to-date that section is. Sometimes, when a particular section has been amended, that page will be more up-to-date than the rest of the code on this site. Some websites can be a little more difficult to date. For example, the Massachusetts legislature does not include a statement of how up-to-date the code is on every page, but only places that information on the General Laws Search and Browse page. At the bottom of that page is the statement, "This site is periodically updated to reflect any changes made to the general laws." This site includes all amendments to the general laws passed before July 1, 2019. The page directs us to the next step in updating this code, locating those laws passed after the last revision. In this case, there is a link to the Massachusetts Session Laws of 2019. From here, you can scan the 2019 laws not yet incorporated into the code to see if any will change the code section you are interested in. This online code only includes laws passed before July 31st, 2019, so you would need to scan the session laws passed July 31st, 2019 and later, including all of the 2020 legislative session to date. By the way, not every law takes effect on being signed by the executive. In Massachusetts, many statutes have an effective date in the text of the statute itself. A bill that does not have an effective date will be effective 90 days after it is signed by the governor. Premium services such as Lexis and Westlaw provide additional indications that a statute has recently changed or is about to change. Lexis uses a yellow yield sign to indicate pending legislation, which will become red if that legislation is passed. This is Section 5116.1 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated. Lexis lets us know that this section has been amended and the change has not yet been incorporated into the code. Lexis provides us a link to the act affecting this document, which happens to be the Georgia COVID-19 Pandemic Business Safety Act, enacted on August 5, 2020. Here we can read the language of the new law. The day I made these slides, Westlaw had already incorporated this change into their Georgia code. As we can see from this statement at the top, that the effective date is August 5th, 2020. But here's a screen capture of an earlier code on Westlaw where you can see that Westlaw uses a yellow flag to indicate pending legislation that could amend or repeal a statute, and a red flag to indicate that a statute has been amended or repealed by a session law that has not yet been incorporated into this code. In this case, an amendment to the U.S. Code passed on August 23, 2019 had not yet been incorporated into the version of the code that took effect on August 1, 2019. Westlaw also uses a yellow flag to alert the researcher to a case that has ruled all or part of a statute as unconstitutional or preempted. These warning signs and flags are your cue to do further research into the future or validity of the statute. They don't tell you the extent of the change or potential change to the statute, just that it exists. You still need to read the case or session law referenced to determine whether or not it affects your use of that statute. When dealing with federal statutes, you can find the latest changes using the classification tables at the Office of the Law Revision Council. For each session of every Congress, there is a listing in public law order and in U.S. Code order. Historical classification tables detail the effects of each session law on the U.S. Code. When dealing with past actions, you need to find out if the law you are looking at was the same as the law that was in effect at the time of the action in question. On Westlaw, you can link back to prior versions of the law as it was back until 1966, selecting versions under the History tab. You can also compare prior versions of a statute to identify the language that has changed between versions. Some prior versions have specific dates they were in effect. For others, you may need to read the actual amendments, since not all parts of the Act took effect at the same time. Lexis Plus has the ability to compare versions of a U.S. Code section as well. Lexis archives each code section as of January 1st of each year. Compare versions on Lexis using pull-down menus to select the versions to compare from Lexis' annual archived codes back to 1992. Use the history of a code section, which appears below the text on Lexis, to determine the public law numbers, citations, and dates of the enactment and every amendment to that section. Westlaw calls this the credits, and it appears after the text of the section here as well. Both services provide links to the public laws listed. If you need versions of statutes too old to be on Lexis or Westlaw, Hein Online has PDF versions of every edition and supplement of the U.S. Code published, as well as a full run of statutes at large. You can retrieve the public laws by either their statutes at large citation or their public law numbers. Hein Online also contains the session laws of the 50 states and a number of historical state codes useful in tracing the history of a state statute.